The Thousand-Year Tide, a Chronicle of New York City. Part 1. The Island That Was Listening. Hook. If you had stood on the edge of the island on a moon-washed night in the year 1600, before the towers of steel, before the echo of subways, before even the word America meant anything certain, you might have heard it. A low rumble, faint as breath, hidden beneath wind and water. Not thunder, not animals. It was the sound of a city that did not yet exist, pulling itself toward the future. And though no one alive could understand it, the island understood. Because islands always listen before humans do. This is the story of that island. Not myth, not imagination, but the real, astonishing, brutal, miraculous journey of New York City, told as if the city itself had been watching all along. Chapter 1. The Island Before Time. Before the Dutch, before the British, before the first ship carved its white line across the Atlantic, Mannahatta was a wild cathedral of green. Dense forests blanketed the land, cut through by streams so clear they mirrored the sky like polished silver. The Lenape people did not see Mannahatta as a possession. They saw it as a relative, alive, breathing, whispering. Children learned the rivers by sound, not by maps. Hunters knew every bend of every trail the way modern commuters memorize train numbers. And at night, Manhattan's air glowed with the faint gold of campfire smoke drifting up against stars unbroken by buildings. The island was smaller then, but richer, bursting with black bears, wolves, elk, and millions of passenger pigeons that moved like a single living cloud. The future city was still sleeping, but everything it would become was already there in the land. The relentless motion, the blending of worlds, the hunger for change. Even the tides around the island seemed restless, like water impatient for the next chapter. What no one knew, least of all the Lenape, was that ships were coming, and they carried with them a force more powerful than guns or goods. They carried the idea of ownership. Chapter 2. The Stranger with the Quick Eyes. The year was 1609 when the sound first broke the morning calm. Children playing along the water looked up as a massive wooden shape pushed through the fog, larger than any canoe, larger than any dream. The Half Moon, Henry Hudson's ship. Hudson himself leaned forward from the deck, eyes sharp, calculating. He was not a conqueror. He was not a hero. He was a navigator in search of a shortcut to Asia. But what he found was something far stranger, a land too valuable to ignore. The Lenape watched from the shore, uncertain whether to wave or flee. Hudson watched them back, uncertain whether to greet or exploit. The first meeting was cautious, gifts exchanged, food offered, gestures mimicked. But beneath the surface, two worlds were already misunderstanding one another. The Lenape believed they were forming a relationship. Hudson believed he was scouting a resource. Both sides smiled, but smiles can hide revolutions. Hudson stayed only long enough to map the river that now bears his name. But the voyage lodged New York in Europe's imagination. A river deep enough for ships, a harbor sheltered and powerful, a land teeming with animals and timber, an island perfectly positioned for trade. It was not simply attractive, it was destiny. And Europe does not forget destiny. Chapter 3. The Dutch call it New Beginnings. By 1624, The Dutch West India Company had made their decision. This place, this island, would become their foothold in the New World. They sent families, supplies, soldiers, livestock, ambition. They sent the blueprint of a colony. The settlement they built at the southern tip of the island was not yet a city, but it had the bones of one. A fort, a marketplace, a street grid that ignored the land and followed only efficiency. A culture of trade before culture of agriculture. And they gave it a name, Nieuw Amsterdam. But the Dutch did something extraordinary, something that would echo through centuries. They welcomed everyone. French Huguenots, Jewish refugees from Brazil, African laborers, free and enslaved, Germans, Scandinavians, Walloons, Englishmen, sailors from half the world. Nieuw Amsterdam became a place where languages collided and customs mixed like pigments in water. For the first time, Manhattan pulsed with diversity, and the island listened, adjusting its heartbeat. Still, all was not harmony. Farmlands expanded, forests shrank, trade deals favored Europeans, and the Lenape lost land faster than they understood the rules. Dutch leaders spoke of purchase, but the Lenape believed land could be no more owned than the sky. A misunderstanding became a wound. A wound became resentment. Resentment became conflict. The seeds of future New York, opportunity and inequality, were already sprouting. Chapter 4. The Man Who Traded a Legend. Some stories are myths. Some stories are metaphors. Some stories simply refuse to die. In 1626, Peter Minuit supposedly purchased Manhattan Island for beads and trinkets worth 60 guilders. It's a story Americans repeat with a chuckle. But the real truth is more complex, more human, and far more ironic. The Lenape who accepted the goods were not selling the island, they were agreeing to share use of it. The Dutch, however, believed they now held full legal title. It was not theft. It was not a swindle. It was a colossal misunderstanding between two civilizations whose worldviews were built on entirely different foundations. But misunderstandings can be more destructive than malice, and the city's future rested on this fragile, flawed exchange. Chapter 5. The Wall, the Wind, and the Switching Flags. By 1653, Nieuw Amsterdam had become a bustling port, alive with fishermen shouting prices, ships from Europe unloading goods, children chasing goats through muddy streets, and merchants arguing in Dutch, French, English, Portuguese, and at night, drunken sailors singing songs no one understood. But the colony had enemies. The English to the north and south watched it with hunger. The Dutch leadership, disorganized and underfunded, struggled to maintain control. Out of fear of attack, they built a crude defensive barrier of logs and earth. That barrier would one day become Wall Street. The irony is almost too poetic. The wall meant to keep enemies out would eventually become the center of global finance, a marketplace for risks, not protections. But in the 17th century, it was just a wall that didn't work. By 1664, English warships sailed into the harbor. The Dutch, hopelessly outgunned, surrendered without firing a shot. The name of the city changed overnight. New York, after the Duke of York. Some colonists hated the change. Some hardly noticed. Most simply kept doing what New Yorkers always do. They adapted. Because cities, like people, survive not by perfection, but by resilience. Chapter 7. The Fire of Empires. Under English rule, New York expanded rapidly. Roads stretched northward, farms multiplied, immigration surged, slavery grew tragically entrenched, and the harbor became a global artery pulsing with trade. But growth brought tensions. The English crown imposed taxes, restrictions, and laws that colonists found increasingly burdensome. Meanwhile, whispers of revolt drifted from Boston and Philadelphia. New York, ever the crossroads, became a stage for conflict. Protests erupted. British soldiers patrolled the streets. Pamphlets spread rebellious ideas. Merchants argued over loyalty and profit. And yet, New York did not ignite first. New York waited.
A city of immigrants, a city of crowds. As steel frames reached skyward, ships continued to arrive by the dozens each week, spilling passengers into Castle Garden, and then, after 1892, into a new processing station on Ellis Island. They came from everywhere. From Cork and Galway, families who had survived famine boarded steamships believing they were sailing toward a second chance. From Sicily and Naples came laborers, masons, and fishermen whose calloused hands bore witness to generations of toil. From Russia and Poland, Jewish families fled pogroms with little more than prayer books wrapped in cloth and whispers of freedom that traveled faster than shits. From China, from the Ottoman Empire, from Greece, from the Caribbean islands, wave after wave of humanity poured into New York like tributaries merging into a vast river. On the narrow streets of the Lower East Side, languages collided. Yiddish, Italian, Irish Gaelic, German, Greek, Arabic, Mandarin, Spanish, and dozens more. Tenement buildings formed canyons where fire escapes crisscrossed like iron spiderwebs. Laundry fluttered between windows. Children played stickball in the gutters. Vendors filled the air with the scents of roasted chestnuts, pickled herring, garlic, and hot pretzels. And yet, for millions, this overcrowded, noisy, chaotic neighborhood became the first chapter of an American life. Some thrived. Others were crushed beneath the weight of hardship. But all, whether they succeeded or suffered, contributed threads to the city's widening tapestry. Political machines and the price of power. Beneath the surface, another story brewed. One of deals, favors, debts, and secrets whispered in the smoky backrooms of taverns and political clubhouses. Tammany Hall, now led by figures like William Boss Tweed and later Charles Murphy, orchestrated the rise and fall of politicians with the precision of a conductor guiding an orchestra. Tammany was both villain and lifeline. To the middle and upper classes, it was corruption incarnate. Padded contracts, graft, extortion, and shameless patronage. But to the poor, especially immigrants who arrived with no English and no social anchor, Tammany was something else entirely. It provided coal in winter, jobs on city payrolls, favors when money ran thin, protection when landlords or factory owners became cruel. The machine didn't ask for gratitude, only votes. Few residents celebrated Tammany openly, but even fewer could deny its influence. It was a shadow woven into the city's political fabric, a reminder that democracy in New York was never a pure and simple thing. It was bargaining, competing forces, loyalties bought and sold, a system constantly shifting under tension. And somehow, miraculously, still moving forward. Brooklyn stands apart and then joins the story. Across the East River, a separate city grew, rivaling Manhattan in ambition and confidence. Brooklyn. Once considered only a suburban outpost, Brooklyn developed a character all its own. Wide, brownstone-lined streets, generous parks, thriving neighborhoods like Williamsburg, Bushwick, and Flatbush, and a civic culture that valued stability, respectability, and structure. Churches, libraries, and community groups flourished. Brooklyn did not dance with the same reckless energy as Manhattan. It marched. But Brooklyn faced a problem. It was too big to remain small and too proud to remain second to Manhattan. In the early 1880s, civic leaders began pushing for a bridge connecting the two cities. The engineering world murmured that a bridge of such length and height was madness, if not outright suicide. And yet, under the vision of John Roebling, and later under the steady, determined supervision of his son, Washington Roebling, who oversaw construction from a sickbed after contracting casein disease, the impossible became real. When the Brooklyn Bridge opened in 1883, people wept. It was not simply a bridge, it was a promise. A promise that anything that could be imagined could be built, that rivers could be tamed, cities connected, and futures reshaped by human hands. Thousands crossed it on opening day. Workers, families, politicians, even circus elephants to prove its strength. Brooklyn looked toward Manhattan and realized that its destiny was intertwined with its once rival across the river. By 1898, after debates, protests, and celebrations, Brooklyn officially joined with Manhattan, Queens, the Bronx, and Staten Island to form Greater New York, the grand consolidation that created the modern five-borough city. The city was now a colossus. The Electric City. As the 20th century approached, something intangible shifted. Gas lights flickered out one by one as electric bulbs took their place. Streetcars hummed along tracks that glowed faintly at night. Telephone wires stretched like nervous nerves above the streets. The city began humming, literally humming, with electric current. Thomas Edison's Pearl Street station powered Lower Manhattan. Nikola Tesla and George Westinghouse battled to expand alternating current networks. Nighttime transformed from an hour of darkness into a second daytime, vibrant and alluring. New York's identity sharpened. The city that never sleeps. Restaurants stayed open late. Theater crowds swelled along Broadway. Factories extended shifts. Newspapers published multiple evening editions. Even the stars in the sky surrendered their glow to electric radiance. The city was becoming unstoppable. The panic of 1907 and the birth of modern finance. But momentum comes with risk. In 1907, fear swept through Wall Street when rumors of bank failures spread. People lined up outside banks demanding withdrawals. Stocks plummeted. Factories threatened layoffs. The city, which had become the financial heart of America, trembled. And then, from his mansion on Madison Avenue, J.P. Morgan stepped into the breach. Summoning bankers, politicians, and financiers, he locked them in his library, literally locked them in, until they agreed on a coordinated plan to stabilize the markets. His intervention halted the panic. But the crisis revealed something far more important, that the nation needed a central bank. 7 years later, the Federal Reserve was created. New York's place in the global economy became unshakable. Ellis Island, the gateway of hope. From 1892 to 1924, Ellis Island processed more than 12 million immigrants. Doctors inspected eyes, hands, posture. Interpreters spoke dozens of languages, guiding newcomers through the maze. Some families wept with relief after passing inspection. Others were shattered when loved ones were detained or sent back. Stories from Ellis Island became family legends. A boy discovering that the first English words he ever heard were "Welcome to America." A young woman clutching a violin, terrified she would lose it during inspection. A father kneeling on the dock, kissing the planks beneath him in gratitude. A child reaching toward the Manhattan skyline, thinking it was made of gold. Every arrival added something intangible but permanent to the city's soul. The melting pot and the tensions within. New York loved calling itself a melting pot, but the truth was more complex. Communities often lived side by side without mixing. Irish dock workers distrusted Italian laborers. Italian grocers and Jewish tailors competed fiercely for customers. African American residents, many having arrived during early waves of the Great Migration, built strong neighborhoods in Harlem and parts of Brooklyn, but faced discrimination in housing and jobs. The city swirled with harmony and conflict, companionship and rivalry, unity and division. And yet, in the long run, mixture triumphed. New York did not melt cultures into sameness, it wove them into coexistence. The Jazz Age, when the city found its rhythm. By the 1920s, everything seemed to move faster. Cars, money, fashion, ideas, and the heartbeat of the city itself. Speakeasies thrived behind unmarked doors. Jazz drifted out of Harlem windows into warm summer nights. Writers, artists, actors, and dreamers flocked to the city in search of fame. The skyline expanded like a living sculpture. The Woolworth Building, the Chrysler Building, the Empire State Building, each soared higher than the last, challenging the sky itself. Construction crews worked from dawn to dusk, steel beams swinging over dizzying heights. Meanwhile, in Harlem, a renaissance unfolded unlike anything ever seen before in America. Poets like Langston Hughes, musicians like Duke Ellington, and thinkers like W.E.B. Du Bois transformed the neighborhood into a center of black artistic brilliance. Their words, rhythms, and ideas traveled far beyond the streets, shaping American culture for generations. In nightclubs like the Cotton Club, music pulsed like electricity. Dancers moved with a joy that only a city like New York could inspire. But the exuberance of the Roaring Twenties ended with the stock market crash of 1929. Factories closed, unemployment soared, breadlines formed along streets where bankers once strutted in fine suits. Families packed belongings onto carts and searched for work. Some slept in makeshift shanty towns in Central Park, bitterly named Hoovervilles. New York, which had once seemed indestructible, now felt vulnerable. Yet even in the darkest hours, the city fought back. Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia infused energy and integrity into public office.
A slow climb back. The 1980s and the dream of renewal. The 1980s brought struggle and rebirth at once. Wall Street roared back to life. The stock market soared. Bankers and traders drank champagne in midtown skyscrapers while homeless families slept in shelters downtown. The contrast was staggering, violent, real. Crime remained high. Muggings, subway fear, the crack epidemic. But investments flowed into some neighborhoods. Artists reclaimed abandoned spaces. Immigrants opened restaurants, shops, and family businesses, turning neglected blocks into hubs of new life. New York felt like a city fighting itself and healing itself simultaneously. Then, in 1989, a new leader arrived with a promise of unity. David Dinkins, the city's first black mayor. He called New York a gorgeous mosaic, a phrase that would shape the city's identity for decades. The 1990s, a turning point. Nothing prepared New Yorkers for the transformation of the 1990s. Under Mayors Dinkins and Giuliani, policing strategies changed dramatically. Crime plummeted. Streets once avoided after sunset buzzed with nighttime crowds. Times Square, long dominated by crime and shuttered storefronts, reinvented itself with blazing billboards, family attractions, theaters, and a tidal wave of tourists. The economy surged. The tech boom began. Neighborhoods flourished. Soho became a gallery district. Chelsea became an arts hub. Williamsburg transformed from industrial grit to creative magnet. Astoria swelled with Greek, Middle Eastern, and Balkan communities. Jackson Heights dazzled with South Asian markets and Latin restaurants. The city was shedding its old fears. September 11, 2001. The day the world stood still. Then came the morning when everything changed. A sky so perfectly blue that it seemed painted. An ordinary Tuesday. People on their way to work. Children walking to school. Buses rumbling. Coffee carts steaming. The heartbeat of New York, unbroken. And then, the unthinkable. Two planes tore into the Twin Towers. A third struck the Pentagon. A fourth fell in Pennsylvania. Smoke turned the sky black. Sirens echoed through the city. Firefighters ran toward flames instead of away. Strangers held each other on ash-covered streets. New York, the city that had survived centuries of storms, fell silent. Nearly 3,000 souls were lost. The heart of Lower Manhattan was shattered. The skyline was changed forever. Yet, in the days that followed, something extraordinary happened. People lined up for blocks to donate blood. Restaurants donated food to first responders. Families opened homes to those stranded. The entire nation leaned toward New York with grief, solidarity, and love. The city rose, not by steel this time, but by unity. Rebuilding and renewal. The years after 9/11 were years of resilience. The memorial pools opened, their water flowing endlessly downward, like the city's tears for those lost, and its promise to never forget. The Freedom Tower, officially One World Trade Center, rose from the skyline like a declaration: New York will always rise. Lower Manhattan transformed. New parks, families, businesses, and cultural institutions breathed life into streets once marked by tragedy. The modern metropolis, 2010s to the present. By the 2010s, New York had become something extraordinary, not just a city, but a world unto itself. Tourism shattered records. Broadway broke box office history. Hudson Yards emerged from nothing. New subway stations opened for the first time in decades. Tech companies set up headquarters. New Yorkers from every background, every identity, every story found a place in the mosaic. Storms struck. Hurricane Sandy hit hard in 2012, but the city rebuilt again. In arts, food, music, literature, and media, New York once more led the world. And then came the pandemic. COVID-19 silenced the city like nothing before. Empty streets, shuttered stores, quiet trains. But slowly, steadily, New Yorkers returned. Because New Yorkers always return. The city today, the city forever. New York in the present day is a city of contradictions. Crowded but lonely. Expensive but irresistible. Chaotic but organized. Old but forever new. It is a place where languages collide, dreams collide, people collide, and yet somehow create harmony. A place where hope is not just a feeling, but a daily practice. A place where every generation writes its own chapter. A place that never stays the same, because it cannot, because its destiny is movement. From Lenape trails, to Dutch trading posts, to steam engines, to steel skyscrapers, to global streets filled with every sound of humanity. New York is a story that will never finish. Because every sunrise over the East River, every skyline silhouette, every voice in the subway, every dream in the mind of someone arriving on a bus, train, or plane, adds another line to a story that began centuries ago, and will continue as long as human beings seek possibility. 1,000 Horizons, an independent historical chronicle of New York City. The Edge of Tomorrow. New York entered the 21st century with the same restless pulse that had carried it through centuries of turbulence and triumph. But something had shifted. The ground beneath its towers, literal and metaphorical, felt less certain, more fragile, as if the weight of the past and the possibilities of the future were pressing simultaneously against its steel ribs. The city that once imagined itself invincible began learning the vocabulary of vulnerability, climate, inequality, pandemic, displacement, automation, surveillance, data. But in each fracture, New York found a spark, an unexpected, stubborn brilliance that refused to dim. It was here, amidst these contrasts, that a new era began. City of Tides. For generations, New Yorkers had treated the sea as background scenery, something to admire on a sunset ferry ride, or glimpse between buildings on the West Side Highway. But now the Atlantic was no longer passive. It pressed against the city like an ancient visitor, reminding it of forgotten debts. In Lower Manhattan, the tides rose, year after year, almost imperceptibly at first. On certain mornings, seawater pooled at curbs that had once remained dry for decades. Tourists waded through puddles near Battery Park, not knowing they were crossing the early outlines of a future shoreline. By the 2030s, the city's planners spoke of managed retreat and adaptive elevation, with the same cool tone that their predecessors once used for zoning and taxation. Yet the sea also offered revelation. From Red Hook to the Rockaways, communities learned to move with the water rather than against it. Waterfront gardens sprouted on floating platforms. Amphibious architecture, homes designed to rise and fall with the tides, became not science fiction but practical necessity. Young architects spoke in poetic terms of sacrificial zones, places designed to take the ocean's impact and transform it into energy, filtration, or habitat. In Breezy Point, retired firefighters and fishermen installed the city's first community-designed surge barrier, its panels painted with the names of lost storms: Sandy, Ida, Isaias. Children ran their fingers along the letters as if tracing a family lineage, because, in a sense, they were. The ocean had resumed its ancient role as teacher. The memory of ash and dust. The